Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Ryan from Young Officers on Fire, and today we have a training video on fire dynamics. Haven't put out a video for a bit, so the goal with these videos is hopefully something a crew can put on for, a lot of them have been 10-20 minutes. This one's going to be closer to an hour, so something the crew can put on and have some good dialogue. This one specifically, we're going to pause so the crews can have some dialogue about what they're seeing, what they think, strategy and tactics that you guys would use in your organization. And this specific PowerPoint, I've got about, maybe 10 iterations of this fire dynamics PowerPoint, from some really long, in-depth ones to some super short, basic ones. So this iteration is kind of like a middle ground one. It should be some good stuff for newer firefighters and hopefully some good review for officers. And also, again, create good dialogue with companies on what they're seeing, what they think they're seeing, why they're seeing it, and what they would do. So here we go. All right, so I want to credit the people that have all been mentors to me, and all this stuff is really from them. It's nothing in here for the most part is anything I've come up with. So I'm just regurgitating it, and the more I've gotten from more people, the more I can kind of condense all their stuff together and make it hopefully have some value. So first one is BC Stan Cook out of Spokane, and he teaches some awesome classes: reading smoke, ITAC, critical decision making. So definitely some of his stuff. And then Captain John Tanaka and Captain Rich Schroner from 3S and their fire and water class, been mentors of mine for a long time. You'll even see some of their slides in here. And then UL NIST, Dan Madrukowski, some line of duty reporting. I don't know Dan Madrukowski's not a mentor of mine, but some of this stuff is information that he's provided for us. So. All right, so our objectives for this class are: review fire dynamics, understand the benefits and dangers of flow paths, simplify GPM versus BTU in relation to application, relate fire dynamics to operation and strategic decision making, and review go, no-go operations and indicators. So what do we know about modern fire growth? Are today's fires hotter? Do they propagate faster? What is their energy compared to 30 years ago? And what are their limiting factors? So pause this and ask your guys this question, see what you guys come up with. So are today's fires hotter? They're not. A flashover in 1912 is the same as today. Do they propagate faster? Absolutely they do. We know that. We'll talk about the modern time temperature curve and kind of how that relates to us. So what is their energy compared to 30 years ago? It's significantly more now. Obviously, we'll talk about that. And then what are their limiting factors? So the big limiting factor that we're experiencing is most commonly related to ventilation, which we're going to break down in-depthly. So solid fuels, Class A combustibles ignite about 451 degrees, and the BTU release rate. So we'll kind of get into how we relate this to ventilation. Again, don't get so caught up in the numbers. I know people get frustrated about, I don't need to know math on the fire ground. No, you're right. You don't. You're not going to pull up to a fire and say, I think that's 16,000 BTUs. But understanding it and preparing for some pre-decided responses as far as handline selection is the key. Nobody's pulling up and looking at a fire and figuring out their BTUs or likely doing an NFA formula as they're pulling a hose line through a front door. But understanding that here allows us to make good decisions based on facts that are fixed. So wood cellulose, still 8,000 BTUs per pound. And so plastics and hydrocarbons, which is obviously the big concern in modern fires, is 2 to 3 times that, 16,000, 24,000 BTUs. But what we'll talk about is, number one, about how they what numbers they use when they look at modern standards for sheetrock and ratings for fire protection walls and stuff like that. And then what are we actually seeing on fires? Are we seeing 24,000 BTUs being released from a couch? We'll talk about that. So fuel capability versus ventilation. So to your left, you have the modern time temperature curve. So this used to be just a slope up, and then it would continue to go up over a long period of time. It is like way more this flat. I think everybody's probably seen it. So now they come up with this modern one, which is way more realistic to what we're seeing on the fire ground. So we see these rapid growth fires. They go up to whatever it is, 1,000 degrees or 800, 700. They peak out because they limit out on ventilation. So, we've got closed up houses that are very energy efficient. So these fires are not getting air, so they die down. The heat decreases, and then we give ventilation. So then we open a door, or maybe the cops do, or maybe the occupant runs out the front door, leaves the front door open. So now we give this fire ventilation, and now it's off to the races. We're seeing a rapid increase back to flashover. So how does this relate to ventilation? And I think the best way to really understand, so hydrocarbons versus cellulose. So when they do the and there's a slide in here a little bit later. When they do the ASTM E119 standards, which is how they review sheetrock 1 hour ratings and fire doors and stuff like that, the numbers that they use are actually still wood-based numbers, 80,000 BTUs per square foot. So why are they using that, and how can that relate to modern fires? And one of the ways that it relates is that we're generally, well, let me say this without getting too far into it, how they rate the pounds per square foot in the house into that plays a role here. But if you look at this chart, this is really, without getting too far into the weeds, this is really showing what we see as a presentation of fuels and ventilation. So cellulose and hydrocarbon-based fuels without ventilation. So we're going to see that traditional BTU release rate of about 8,000 BTUs because it's limited by the ventilation. So this is Thornton's rule. Basically, the simplicity of the rule is more ventilation, more fire growth and activity. So if we don't give a fire ventilation, and we'll talk about, ventilation can be very beneficial. It can do a lot of good. It's understanding it. But without adequate ventilation, basically we don't see fires going beyond where they used to in traditional wood heat release rates. However, when we give them appropriate or accelerated ventilation, then we see those hydrocarbons go in that 16 to 24,000 BTU. So how is it that the BTU release rate of wood is 8,000, but hydrocarbons can be 16 to 24,000? That's a big range. The range is dependent on the ventilation profile. So you give the fire more ventilation, you will see a maximum BTU release rate versus a lower BTU release rate with some ventilation. So some of the growth factors, fuel composition, obviously, what is it made of? How much of it? What is the fuel load? Is this a furniture store, or is this, a typical house setting? Ventilation percentage and location is extremely critical to what we're seeing in our fire growth. So how far is the ventilation away from the fire? And then what percentage of it is it? Is it 10% ventilation profile? So is the window 3 feet by 4 feet? So it's 12 feet of a 1,200 square foot room. So it is, that's pretty small ventilation profile versus that same window in a 100 square foot room or 120 square foot room. So you're at 10% ventilation. Fuel orientation. So we know that everybody's seen the pictures of from IFSTA where you put, something flat versus stand it up, and then is it in a corner or up against a wall? We get reflectivity. We can get significant increase in BTU release rates. Now, that doesn't mean, again, that we're going to go in and go, oh, that's a corner fire, we're going to fight this different. It's just understanding it. So, does fire really double in size every 90 seconds? I have heard this over and over again. I've heard it every 60 seconds. I've heard it every 2 minutes. I hate this statement. I really do. I think it is completely unfactual in science because there is too many variables to say any sort of statement like this. So this is where I think the statement came from, and I'm going to show you why I think it's ridiculous. Okay, so it tells us right here, the room is 12 feet by 12 feet with an 8-foot ceiling, 8 foot wide by 7 foot tall opening in the front wall. So 12 foot by 12 foot, 144 square foot room. Okay, I'm going to fast forward a little bit. I think everybody's probably seen this video. We'll go to about 2:30. All right, so we see the fire is, I don't know, 4 foot by 5 feet at 2:30. All right, so we're not even to 3:30. Has this fire probably tripled in size? It has. So that's less than 1 minute. It's tripled in size. So, and at 3:30, we've got the whole entire room flashed over. So this is great for, I guess, selling the idea that fires are super dangerous in a modern fire environment. This is why firefighters are dying, because these cellulose-based fuels are just, they're overpowering us. So there's one thing that NIST, and I can't even believe that NIST did this to prove this point, other than it really paints the picture of what we discussed earlier, that Thornton's rule matters. So what we have is a 12 foot by 12 foot square space, so 144 square feet. Now, what the issue is here is that how many living rooms have a 7 foot by 8 foot door? So 7 foot by 8 foot door, 56 square foot door. This is like somebody has a small living room and they with a roll up garage. All right, and they opened it up and let it rip. Okay, so when you take that percentage, so let Let me just do it on the calculator real quick because I don't have that kind of math skills in my head. So it puts us at 39% ventilation profile. So a 7x8 door in a 144 square foot room is a almost 40% ventilation profile. That's unbelievable. You will never, I shouldn't say never, we can. I guess a garage is like that, the garage door's open on a small garage. You've got a 40%. And we see those fires where 2.5s are, where you have to have a 2.5 to knock out a garage fire because the industry quarter is just getting worked over. That's why, because of the ventilation profile. So this to me is just a huge fallacy, but it does really depict the idea of this is a 8,000 BTU fire, and if this had the appropriate ventilation profile, it would probably be in that 8,000 to 16,000. But what you have is a 3 times the typical ventilation profile accelerated growth. So typical ventilation profile is generally regarded as 10%. Beyond 10% is accelerated, and 15% is extremely accelerated. And this is over 2.5 times that. So it's significant, and this video, to me, is not real useful for us in the fire service. So gas fuels. Gas is a major component of our fires. Recognizing when we're in bad situations and understanding it is super critical. So the properties of CO, it ignites at 1128 degrees, and its flammable range is 12.5 to 74. Again, the numbers are not important. It's understanding what that means to us. And then I just put cyanide in here, another common byproduct of burning. Its ignition temperature is negative 18 degrees, and its flammable range is 5.6 to 40%. So what does this mean? And so this is like 2 of the gases that are released when we burn things in modern fuels, and there's really like a whole crap load of them. So what this means is that the potential to have smoke ignite in these ranges is very high, very, very high. So crawling through that blacked out, smoked out hallway, like many of us have done many of times, with no understanding of where the fire is. I know that my first decade in the fire service, that is how we fought fires. Somebody did a size up. The engine company sure didn't. All we did was throw on our mat, got off the truck, masked up, ran to the door, went through the front door every time. No idea where the fire was, didn't look at the windows, didn't look at anything. And we just crawled until we could find the fire and put it out. Super lucky that many of us have never been injured in those type of situations, because we know that this is just ready to ignite, and all we need is that right mixture to happen. So Charles' law, every 459 degrees, we have a gas doubling. So basically what this means to us is that heat equals volume. So when we have a full growth fire, we can see almost 3 times the gas and pressure in a room. In one of the other videos, we talk about positive pressure attack and why it's really ineffective and really dangerous. And I think I would like to do, it came up at the last conference I was at significantly about positive pressure ventilation, positive pressure attack. So can it work? Yes, it absolutely can work under the right circumstances. And one of them is that it's understanding how you were effective. So if you do a transitional attack and take all of the heat and pressure out of a room, and then PPA, go on the A side and go to the C side, you will be effective if the transitional attack was effective, because you have shrunk the gas and the pressure down likely about 3 times. But if you have a room that is fully involved and you have the fire venting from one bedroom window, and it's putting half of the smoke out of that and the rest is coming back to the A side because there's more pressure in there, you can't overpressure the room and push more products of combustion out the window. So what do? You put the fan in, and it pushes the products of combustion right back to where the fan is. which there is a ton of videos out there on. But I think that'll be one of the videos coming up, is showing how dangerous that can be. But for this topic of conversation, we're really talking about how smoke is fuel. And so this is from the book Smoke Burns, John Taylor, which is a really good book, high level, but it's good stuff. So one of the best ways I've heard this described, and again, this was from a Stan Cook class, is from your nipple line to your knees. If you have smoke in that range, the likelihood that you have an explosive mixture is very high. So there's been a couple line of duty deaths where it was a simple like couch fire, bed fire, that basically was in a smoldering state. So crews go in, it's a couch cushion, and the smoke is about waist high. They go in with a pecan, they flip the couch cushion over, right flammable range, boom, lights off the whole room, kills 2 firefighters. That obviously, I think if you've been on the job a while, you've probably been in a situation where you did something like that and just got lucky. So we need to make sure in those situations where we have those smoke conditions to ventilate the smoke first, or rapidly cool anything before you start turning things over. Because what they did is they have, exactly what we talked about, a cellulose-based fuel that's smothered down with no oxygen. They flip it over, they give it all the oxygen it needs. Then you have the smoke that has the right explosive limit, and boom, you've got a recipe for disaster. And this little chart just basically signifies lower explosive limit, upper explosive limit, and then in this range, we're just right for ignition. All right, so this slide, just briefly want to talk about BTU versus watts. That's something that I had a hard time kind of wrapping my mind around because all the UL NIST stuff is coming out the last quite a bit now, 7+ years, referencing watts, and especially in the line of duty death where they did computer reconfigurations and they said, they're getting 10 million watts, and what does that mean, and what are watts, and how does that relate to BTUs? So the best way that I can really define it, and again, I'm not a chemistry guy, so if you want something more in depth, then you have to search it out from someone else but me. But basically, when we're talking about BTUs, BTUs is like, I don't know how to raise 1 gallon or 1 cup or whatever of water from 67 to 68 degrees or whatever it is. It relates nothing to us. We have no grasp other than to look at something and say like, okay, that's a typical 8,000 BTU or a 20,000 BTU or whatever. But we're really talking about time with BTUs. You're talking about how long does it take to increase temperature over time. So why is NIST using watts? So wattage is more about energy. So this picture just kind of depicts like an 80 watt candle multiplied 10 times is that, that same candle, that same flame temperature with 10 of them standing next to each other is 800 watts. So it's energy released simultaneously. So not necessarily over a time. So like, BTUs can be measured over an hour or whatever it is. So anyways, that's kind of the difference in a very rudimentary explanation. So, and this just kind of speaks to that. It's the time temperature curve, the STT, which is very old. And again, it's a relationship to temperature over time. All right, so flow pass. I love talking about flow pass. So here's some facts about flow pass. So they're invented in 2008, and they will kill you. Never be in a flow path ever, because you'll die. Obviously, this is a joke, and it's satire in the fact that a lot of people, after the NIST stuff came out in like 2007, 2010, is that we had to change our tactics because everybody's dying in flow pass, and we're seeing departments putting curtains in 1-story A-side entries so that they have door control, or assigning a person to door control. So again, I think this is the fire service just like jumping on the latest thing and just taking it totally out of context. People getting their hands on a fraction of the information who never read. I mean, some of those reports, they're hundreds and hundreds of pages, and so somebody takes a snippet from a review and they just, they're ready to change how the fire service works. So flow paths are not new. They were not defined even by NIST. Flow paths have been understood for as long as the fire service has been around, and firefighters utilized flow paths before they had SCBAs at a level of understanding unlike most of us, because they were betting their oxygen and their life on the fact that they had that figured out and dialed in. So to me, flow paths are really important to understand because they can kill you, they can be deadly, but we can't just jump to that conclusion that all flow paths are bad, because as we're going to talk about, a lot of flow paths are good and we use them to our benefit all the time. So good flow paths. Push from the intake, fire at the exhaust. So what we have in the picture is a second 1.5 story A-frame. So you've got a fire up in the half story, and it is unilaterally venting out. So the hose crews are going to push up the stairs and they're going to push that fire into the exhaust. This is perfect. Now, this same exact fire can be a bad flow path if you've got a 20-mile-per-hour wind pushing into that exhaust point. So again, it's understanding those things and knowing when flow paths are good and when flow paths are bad. So even in that scenario, though, if you've got a 20-mile-per-hour wind in a 1.5-story house, that's not a flow path you're going to die in. It's not going to push the fire back down the room, down the stairs, and into the living room, out the exhaust. That's just not going to happen. So another good flow path, wind at the back of the entry team. So we've got a 20-mile-an-hour wind on side A, and we have a fire venting on side C. Beautiful. You've got some natural ventilation. Again, we're not talking about a fan where we're putting 15,000 cubic feet a minute in there. That's a different story. So don't confuse those two. We're talking about a little wind at your back as you make your entry. You're knocking the fire down, taking the heat out of it, shrinking it down, utilizing Charles' law, and then having the wind push the fire away from you, as well as your nozzle movement, flowing and moving and knocking it out. And then unidirectional flow path. Again, it's not necessarily, I shouldn't say maybe it's a good thing. It's an uneventful thing. It's what we do all the time, right? All right, so little video here. All right, so just take a minute with your crews and tell me what that flow path. See if we can go back to it. I go too far. Right there. Unilateral or bilateral flow path, which if that term is not coming to your head, if you haven't gone over that yet, we will talk about that in a minute. But if you have, then you should know what kind of flow path this is. So we got no wind. You've got this unilateral flow path. So unilateral meaning, sorry, I'm jumping all over here. Unilateral meaning all the fire is coming out of the exhaust. So this could mean that either there's an intake that's open, there's a door open, or it could just mean that there's enough oxygen within that structure to give it oxygen, but definitely the room to the door is likely open because you have a unilateral. So these guys go in. It's dark and nasty. Okay, so they're going to start flowing. So now they are on the intake side. They're pushing all the products of combustion out of that exhaust. This is exactly what we want. So you can see conditions are not too bad. Again, I don't want to go too far into transitional attacks because I know for sometimes, you know, with manpower limitations, it's the best option you have. But if it's not the best option you have based on manpower, this fire is a great depiction. You've got a 2-room fire, so a transitional attack in this A side room, if we're calling that back entrance an A side, is not going to put this fire out on the C side room. So again, looking at flow path, officer position, visibility, searchability. So if we transition this fire, let me go back. There we go. So we transition this fire. Why is it not giving me that picture? There we go. All right, so we hit this from right here. We transition this fire. Now we push all of the smoke, the products of combustion, into the interior space. So you can look at the NIST stuff. You could be at the end of that hall right there. There's still survivability in there. Or what I like to talk about is searchability, which is kind of coined through Cody Trestel, I believe. Brothers in Battle is the first person I ever heard it from anyways, which is a whole other topic. But so if we transition this, we push it back in. Now as we make entry, we've worsened visibility, we've worsened survivability, we've worsened searchability. So instead, we make an offensive attack, and we make a push down this hallway, push the fire out of those, out of the exhaust. If I'm the officer position, so depending on how many people you have, I like to be out in front of the hose line so I can, one, search for victims, search for fire, and if there's fire over my head, the nozzleman's gonna knock that fire back. If you're at limited manpower, you're a 2-person team moving the hose, then you don't get to be out front. It just is what it is. But this fire shows, like, if you have a good exhaust, as an officer, you could clear that entire hallway, clear within a reachable space inside those 2 rooms that are on fire, and then come back while the fireman's making the push. Now, if the hallway's flashing over, then you just make the push and just push it all out. But so flow paths of insignificance. So again, a bilateral flow path is that it's getting oxygen in below and it's venting gases above. So it could be one-sided, it could be two-sided. This could be somebody left the back door open and we make entry from the front door, so you've got oxygen coming in from both places. Or you could completely take this side of the equation out. Same thing, which is extremely common for us as firefighters, is we open the front door, we give the fire oxygen, we get our face down on the floor. You can see literally exactly how to get to the fire because of the oxygen going to the fire. At the same time, it's exhausting right over the top of us, back out the door. This is all good as long as we don't try to put a fan in here and then push this back over the top of us. Excuse me. So again, pictured here, some live fire training. You've got an intake going in, an exhaust going out. This is a perfectly safe, perfectly fine fire to enter into. Little video. So remember, when you're doing your 360, when we're doing size up, if you find open doors, close the door. It's going to decrease that fire growth. So what we have here is basically a bilateral vent. So you've got oxygen being drawn in through the door, smoke being pushed out the top. Again, perfectly safe fire to go into. You've got a rip and fire. You got fire in the ceiling. He's going to put some water on it and make it better. Hopefully. So it looks like overwhelming fire, and inch 3/4, 30 seconds application, goes away. Okay, so bad flow paths. So again, this is not to diminish the fact that bad flow paths are bad, because they will kill you. There is no question about that, and there is several firemen who have lost their lives being in bad flow paths. That doesn't mean every fire is a bad flow path. In fact, it's pretty rare, depending on your district, I guess, would be the caveat to that. But basically what we have is we have a unidirectional flow path with a vent high and an intake low. So the firefighters that were killed in San Francisco, it was a multi-story house. They went in on the street side. It was a oceanfront house, so not a lot of access to the back to even have a size up. They had massive bayfront windows here, floor to ceiling. So firefighters go in, they're making a push down the stairs. These windows fail. They're huge. We're talking about major accelerated fire growth, likely wind. I can't remember exactly. I think it talks about it in the LODD, but probably off the ocean there's wind. So not only do you have low to high intake exhaust, you have wind accelerating it. And these guys in the stairwell, they literally had nothing. There was nothing they could do for themselves when those windows broke and that fire started going up the stairs trying to make its way out to the exhaust. You got about 2 seconds to roll out of the flow path. Water's not going to fix it. You just have to be out of the flow path. That's the only way you're going to live through a flow path. And one of the questions that I commonly get is, how do you recognize a flow path? As an interior perspective, you don't. You're probably dead before you realize that you're in a flow path. From a strategic perspective, it's size up and knowing that you have a fire in a below grade, and that you have to attack it from below grade. You have to put water in it. So again, transitional here, I'm fine with. You got a below grade fire, or you make a seaside attack and go in. Now in this particular one, I don't believe that they actually could do that. So a lot of problems with that fire. They had a kind of an unwinnable circumstance. So unidirectional flow paths, low to high or wind driven. So they can reach up to 18 miles an hour, which is very significant. They are not affected by hose streams. Velocity and turbulence increase the heat transfer. So just like when you're out on the river and it's cool, the faster you go in the boat, the cooler it becomes. That's that turbulent heat transfer, is the wind going across your skin. It is equally as significant when you're talking about heat and you're adding speed and turbulence and velocity. It's way more significant low to high, and it can be shut off by a hollow core door, basically redirecting the flow path. Again, but you have to know you're in a flow path, which is the real challenge. All right, so another UL video just demonstrating a low to high unilateral flow path. So VES operation, that door was open. We've got a rip and fire inside. Now we're in the exhaust. We immediately have nasty black smoke coming out. So the question for your crews is, you're sizing this up. Is this a go or a no-go? And one of the things we talk about with VES is whatever comes out of this window should not be a surprise. Size up the window, size up the incident. If they know there's a fire down here, if this window is blacked out with soot, and there's a fire down here that does not have water on it, when they take this window, they should not be surprised that this is what they get. Of course, this is a missed demonstration. This is not a fire scene, obviously. So there's an interior door. That talks about the temperatures. Sorry, I'm having a I couldn't remember if the video was in here that showed the closed door version, but yeah, I don't think it was. That's another video. basically close the door, and then you got good conditions on your VES. So do we need door control? So this is Derek Alconis, I believe is his name, which is he's a super obviously knowledgeable guy. Was very involved with the U on this stuff, but this is something that they're teaching is door control, and like I said, I think there's a place for it. It's understanding when to use it. It's just not on every fire. So I know. Well, let's watch the video. Let's
Fire attack firefighter pulls the attack line to the front door and prepares the line for entry by rick-racking the hose at the entrance. Once at the door, you call for water and don your SCBA and gloves. When the hose is charged, you bleed the line and check the nozzle pattern prior to entering the building. The nozzle pattern should be a straight stream. Before entry, check for heat by applying a short burst of water onto the upper third of the door. If steam is produced, you know you have heat. The next several tasks of the team is critical to limiting the fire's growth and effectively getting inside to control the fire. As the nozzle firefighter and the captain are ready to advance inside the door control firefighter opens the door cautiously. Once the door is cracked open, the firefighter at the nozzle flows a straight stream at the ceiling to check the temperature. If the water is converted to steam and doesn't return in the form of water droplets, this indicates high heat at the ceiling. This is a watch out in structure firefighting. High heat at the ceiling if steam is produced.
Okay, so
the hose is charged.
Sorry to Monday morning quarterback, but there's a few things that I have a difference of opinion about. So rick-racking the hose, I don't know when this would ever be good for setting up your hose for a solid movement. I tend to align with guys like Ray McCormack and Dave McGrail, and we set up our hose and brush to be advanced straight or towards the swing of the door, so that because once you get 10 feet in here, you've already created a pinch point on this. So I'm not a big fan of that. I also don't believe that this water into the environment. It was something I was taught, something I used to teach, until some smart people kind of spoke to the idea of this, that not all steam is converted, or excuse me, not all water is converted to steam. So this is really a false, and I can't remember. I believe that they did some testing on this. I don't want to quote that, but that they found it to just be inconsistent. Now, if you're in a commercial building and you've got like 2,000 degrees over your head, then maybe you're going to get no water down if you spray a hose. But in an 8-foot ceiling, if you open up a hose line and spray it at 160 or 180 gallons, it doesn't really matter how hot it is. You're going to get water back on the floor. So I think this is pretty inconsistent with science.
Flows a straight stream at the ceiling to check the temperature. If the water is converted to steam and doesn't return in the form of water droplets, this indicates high heat at the ceiling. This is a watch out in structure firefighting. High heat at the ceiling can mean the fire is rapidly moving toward flashover. Slowing the fire's progression at this point is achieved by taking a leg out of the fire triangle. When the temperature is reduced enough to allow water droplets to return from the ceiling, the fire attack crew advances the line further into the structure. Bouncing short bursts of water off the ceiling into the smoke layer should occur while the line is advanced.
Okay, again, something I was taught, something I taught for quite a while. I believe that Aaron Fields' studies have basically disproven. Not to say that this can't work. It does work. I know I've done it on fires. But, if this is the situation that he is depicting for us, it's high heat, we're pre-flashover, then open up the water, open up your line, flow the water, take fire out of the equation completely, floor, ceiling, floor. And problem solved. So again, it's a tactic that I think is antiquated.
Into the building. Be careful not to flow too much water. Maintain your thermal balance by flowing enough water so the heated gases contract when cooled. Too much water can create steam that expands and collapses the neutral plane. If you note a change in condition...
Okay, so again, we know that if we're flowing and we're knocking back fire that's 15, 20 feet out in front of us, we do get some steam conversion, but also what we want to do is we want to be venting opposite our attack and vertical venting, and that's going to take care of that for us. So instead of hoping that we applied the right amount of water in a fire scenario where there's so many variables, we overflow the environment. Once a fire is to the stages where you're going to be flowing in there, there's nothing savable. They're not going to save that sheetrock in there. The couches are not going to be saved at that point. Now that's not a comment as far as we need to make sure that we're not doing undue damage, but if you have fire on the ceiling, that you're not saving things in that room by not getting it wet. That's
flow some
folklore.
water to check the heat. It's about building your situational awareness inside the structure. The water in your hose line is your lifeline. It is your tool to put the fire out and to keep you safe. Use it. A little water on the furnishings around you won't destroy them. However, not flowing water and crawling into a flashover will destroy you and those you are attempting to save.
All right, so that's pretty much the gist of the video. But so do we need door control? So if we're going into a basement that doesn't have any windows, I can't put any water in from the outside. Again, I'm a fan of putting water in from the outside on a low to high scenario if we can get water to the actual base, or attacking low to high as a first preference. But if I have to make a push down a stairwell, I'm okay with somebody doing door control. If we're going into a deep-seated fire and it might be a significant amount of time before I make the seat of the fire, then I am for door control. But on your typical bread and butter ranch house, these door curtains and having somebody be door control when what I really want is an intake at my back and the exhaust at the fire room with an outside vent man, that's what I want. I don't want you to diminish my intake. I want to increase my intake. All right, so name that flow path. Not sure what's going on here. All right, so you heard me utilize the term OVM. So I know a lot of departments are not familiar with this concept. New York's literally has a OVM position. A lot of bigger departments do on their trucks. So it's somebody who is going to go to the fire room, opposite attack. They're the outside vent man. So we've got a fire in this room. We've identified by the smoke, reading the windows. This is where the seat of the fire is. We're making an offensive attack, Alpha to Bravo. The OVM man goes in place. The hose team's getting ready to make the push. They call for the vent. OVM takes the window. So look at all this pressure, all this that's being released out of the window instead of over the top of the fireman. All right, so take a minute, pause this, name that flow path, and discuss it with your crew. Okay, so that is a unilateral flow path. The door is open. It does not have membrane. It's drawing oxygen from the house and from the A side now. And this is complete exhaust, no intake. So you can see how much fire and smoke is being vented out. The hose team makes the push. They're pushing all the products of the combustion away from potential victims, away from possible places of refuge in the house, and this is bread and butter, textbook. All right, name that flow path. This is one that's going to challenge you a little bit. There's not, I'll tell you right now, there's not an exact answer on this, so I'll play it and then gain some dialogue with your crews about it. All right, name that flow path. Okay, so we'll break it down from the beginning. So name that flow path. So currently what we have is a bilateral flow path. So we have fire being vented out the top and oxygen being brought in. I don't know exactly what the circumstances are on the fire here. This could be some very old windows that failed extremely early in the fire. They could have had an outside vent person knock them out before they started shooting the video. I really have no idea. But typically we're not going to see 3 big windows fall out when we have a growth stage fire. So something that's important to understand with flow paths is that you're not going to actually know the flow path until you've reached full growth. So here what we have is a unilateral flow path because we have the path of least resistance. So there is a door open here because you're going to see the hose line come, or you did see the hose line come in and knock it out. So right now it's drawing oxygen from the path of least resistance because the windows are right next to the fire. The door is over here, and the door is probably smaller ventilation profile than these 3 massive windows. So we start out drawing oxygen in. As the fire continues to grow, you can see it turn into more of a unilateral flow path, and it's going to start drawing oxygen in from that door and completely overtaking this as an exhaust point. So also within that, this is a beautiful flow path. We've got someone pushing up the stairs. So now you have that unilateral. So we know that we do not have membrane. The stairwell is open. The firefighter pushes up. He applies water. Boom. We get great exhaust and conversion out of our outside vent. All right, name that flow path. All right, we'll pause it there. I'll pause it. You guys can pause it. Take a minute to discuss. Okay, so again, this is another one to challenge you. We have a changing flow path. So right here, when I initially paused it, right here, what we appear to have is a bilateral flow path, which generally indicates to us that you have membrane. Now we know by the totality of the scene that we don't have membrane because you have smoke out of this window, and this window. So why is it that we have a unilateral flow path bilateral flow path that turns into a unilateral flow path? Is because we don't have a full growth fire yet. So we're still drawing some oxygen in through the path of least resistance, or which is actually the case in this scenario, I believe, is the fire's over here and it just hasn't overwhelmed these exhaust points yet. So looking at the smoke, so we can see higher velocity, little less, far less, and changing color on the other side. So likely what we have is a fire in this room with an open membrane. Now as it starts to overwhelm the exhaust, we get a unilateral flow path out of the exhaust. All right, so now we're going to jump into GPM versus BTU fireground facts. So again, I've heard it a lot. I don't take a calculator to the fireground. Good, neither do I. I take a calculator to the training ground, and that's That's what this is about understanding your capabilities and limitations before you ever leave the station. So understand the NFA fire flow formula, and then what is the fire flow formula? So discuss with your crew. So what it is length times width of involvement divided by 3. Again, we talked about ordinary ventilation being at a max of 10%, and then so this is a caveat. These are the 2 caveats. So something that's not often talked about on this consensus standard is that it has to fall within these parameters for it to be accurate. So that needs to be ordinary ventilation, which is actually kind of into accelerated, as we talked about, but basically not completely over-ventilated. And then less than 50% involvement. So you go to a room that's got 75, 80% involvement. This standard just doesn't work. It doesn't mean that we can't put it out. It just means that the water numbers are going to be off. So again, remember, this is a consensus standard. It's not exact science. So there's too many variables to have an exact amount of water. So, but how do we put this into context to be prepared to go fight a fire? And so we can take this equation and we can flip it around with some basic algebra here. So instead of figuring out the GPM times 3 divided by the square feet, which tells us how many gallons we need, we can take the GPM that we're flowing and multiply that times 3 and equal our square footage. So for inch 3/4, for us, a 7/8, that's 160. We can call it 150 for math purposes because I'm truck guy. So we do 150. We multiply that times 3 instead of divide, and that gives us 450 square feet of fire in a 900 square foot room. So we carry 2-inch. I love 2-inch. If you don't know about it, watch my video on 2-inch hose. Most underutilized hose on the fire ground, in my opinion. So 2-inch hose, we're at 260. So we'll call it 250. That puts us at 750 square feet of involvement for a 1,500 square foot space, 50% involved. So 2.5, we're 1 3/16 tips, which gives us about 300 gallons. So multiply that times 3, that gives us 900 square feet in an 1,800 square foot space. So what does that mean to you on the fire ground? So for me, this is what it means. A 1 and 2 room fire for me, I'm a truck guy, I know. Actually, it's a quint, so we do have hose, and sometimes on a terrible, terrible day, we have to pull it. So, but what that means is if it's a 1 or 2 room fire, to me, that's 1 3/4 hand line all day long. For us, since we have 2-inch on residential, if it's 2 or 3 rooms, that's a, what's the word I want to use? It's an indicator to move to the next size. So 2 to 3 room fire, we go to 2-inch, and anything commercial, I'm a proponent of 2.5, not 2-inch. To me, it's places on the residential fire ground. So for you, if you don't have 2-inch, maybe you have different gallon, maybe you have different 1 3/4 nozzles, maybe you have a 15/16 or a 7/8, and you get to decide which one you want to pull for the fire. You might be thinking about a 7/8 tip for this 2 to 3 room fire, or moving to 2.5 if you're at a 3 room fire. So it's just understanding what you have, what you flow, and how much you can put out. Okay, so putting fire dynamics to use strategically and tactically.
Who's in there? Communication engine 3. We just got reports that we have a child inside. We're going to be going into rescue mode and passive command. Possible kid inside, guys. A kid inside. Where is she? How old is she, ma'am?
So to me, outstanding. Get on scene. They know they have a rescue. They pass command. They go into rescue mode, go to work. That's a very quick picture, but basically what you have is a unilateral. We're going to see if we can still frame it. There we go. So we have a unilateral. So they open the door, and they're giving this fire oxygen. My lieutenant and I had a long debate about the fire dynamics of this incident, but what I believe I'm seeing is a decay stage fire. They open the door, they give it oxygen, and you start seeing some fire growth.
We got 3 kids inside. 3 kids in the back.
So it's like zero vis, black smoke to the floor, but not a lot of fire, which to me feels like this seems like an incident we had where we had pulled a couple kids out. The same scenario, was black to the floor. The fire was essentially out, but you have like what looks like a little garbage can fire here. So they open up some windows. Looks like some ventilation is improving. In this scenario, this could absolutely increase the fire growth if the fire is not addressed and ventilation is initiated. Okay, so we have it's hard to tell what the smoke conditions are, but they make the grabs, get the kids out. So awesome job, Fresno. Job well done. A good video of solid firemanship. Okay, one of the last videos here. Oops.
Can you hear me? You need to get everyone out of the house. Check through the time on the time operator 1, several calls reporting the house on fire, 203 East Hazelton.
So this is an interesting one. This is a massive place. Looks like early construction. Looks like we have balloon frame. I'm not sure if this is like part commercial, part residential. Bonus points for having a growler. Okay, so name that flow path. So currently right here, it looks like we have a possibly a bilateral. It almost looks like that window is still intact. It's hard to tell, but if we have a bilateral, that would typically mean if the fire is in fully developed stage that you have membrane that is getting the oxygen from the intake. The intake and the exhaust are the same hole.
Control 2, engine 2 is on scene, 2-story, multi-family
So
dwelling.
name that flow path. Okay, so now it looks like we have I believe this is the same window, a unilateral flow path. So we have obviously another membrane open in there. So what likely happened is we were not in a full growth fire yet. The window had just failed, so you were getting some fire out of the top, but there was enough, the fire was close enough and early enough that it wasn't overwhelming the exhaust port, and now it is. So now there is more pressure in there than this room can ventilate. So again, putting a PPV fan to this fire is going to push anything else back over the top of us and back to that PPV fan. So strategy and tactics on this, obviously there's victims, so there's about 24 rooms to try to VES. So I'm going to be looking for which is the high priority, which is going to be close to the fire, rooms that have smoke in them, or some indicator that we, if it's targeted, we know where the victims are. Obviously, we're going to start there. If we're just guessing, then we go to the highest hazard rooms first and work away. So they're going to pull a line, offensive attack for the engine. So again, we've got really a perfect flow path here. They're going to go in the intake and push all of the fire and the products of combustion out of the exhaust. Negative 10 points for having a pistol grip nozzle. Okay, so you can see they immediately start putting water on the fire, pushing the products of combustion away from the survivable space and out of the exit. So if this window was intact, they likely would have called for an OVM to take the window. It's textbook. It's perfect. You can see how good they have visibility in here because they are pushing the products of combustion out of the exhaust, and they're utilizing the front door to help ventilate in a positive flow path. So again, on this scenario, you shut the door. As they start knocking the fire down, you worsen the flow path. Worsen the visibility of that flow path. Alright, so that pretty much covers that video. I do a lot of Stockton videos because they do a really solid job. Outstanding firemanship there from what I've seen. Okay, hate to beat these guys up, but not outstanding firemanship here. So again, talking some strategy and tactics. I think a lot of people have probably seen this fire, so name that flow path. So we have a unilateral flow path, so we know the front door's open. We're getting intake through the front door, exhaust through these what's probably dining room windows. So as far as strategy and tactics, so specifically getting into I'm arriving first due crew. We're going to push in right here, put the line in between the fire and the rest of the occupiable space, searchable space. And the next due crew is going to go straight to the bedrooms and start searching bedrooms. So the homeowner, this is a fatality fire. The homeowner did die. Those were not the tactics that this particular agency chose. So again, looking in these windows, we've got good visibility. These are all, I probably wouldn't VES over the fire unless I was knew that that's where there was a kid there, so there was a victim in there, and maybe we put water on the fire, and yeah, I don't know. We do really have to knock that fire down to go over, because you're not going to bring them out that window either, so the more likely scenario is we go into the window next to it, we go beyond the door and make that room pretty easily. Again, I hate to beat guys up. I don't know anything about this department. I'm sure, this being a fatality fire, that these individuals are super unhappy. This is how the way it went and what ended up happening, but there's a lot of issues. So they choose to go transitional on this. So we're outside. Not exactly sure what we're doing here, but they're going to try to put water in. Again, you know, the issue with transitional here is you're pushing all of those products of combustion now into this open space. We know that it's open, and you know, we know that they're not putting water in the best spot, but still, it's not near as effective as it could be. So nobody gets inside to search, and it's a fatality fire. So I think it's a little late to vent the roof on a one-story fire, but again, so you know, this really comes back to algorithmic tactics. So we vent every fire, we do A, B, or C on every fire. So we've got a 2-story fire, and maybe they're afraid it got into the attic. I'm not sure, but search would be my priority, way ahead of ventilation on this fire. And I think now is when they end up getting some search done. I don't know that for a fact, but anyways, it's not an ideal scenario. Okay, so go, no go.